Well, good morning, everybody. We have a skeleton crew here. My gosh. So hope everybody is recovered from last night. I can't see you with the lights, so that's why I'm looking out there. So I'm Shawn Bland, Director of Retail at CoreStates Group. I've got a great panel here. We've got a great topic today to discuss that I think impacts everybody. Obviously, from all facets of the development and construction process, tackling development costs. The panel is, I'll let you introduce yourselves.
Yeah, I'm Bruce Walters, Chief Development Officer for Dollar Tree and Family Dollar out of Chesapeake, Virginia.
I'm Kelly Radford, Vice President of Store Development for Party City out of Rockaway, New Jersey.
I'm Tim Jagneaux, Vice President of Construction and Facilities with Tractor Supply. We're based in Brentwood, Tennessee.
Great. So great brands, obviously development costs for you guys. You've got large programs, a lot of stores, remodels, new builds, whatever. So, I mean, obviously this discussion is going to impact, you guys, and other people can relate as well. I think and obviously if anybody has any questions or comments to the panel we're talking, I think we're all open to having this kind of a roundtable discussion. We're obviously going to talk about some, but please raise your hand, chime up. That'll be helpful. When we were talking development costs, what's really, we all know what development costs, what's rising, how do we change it? How can we take steps to mitigate those costs? How can we learn from each other that we can, say, this isn't working? There's costs that are out of our control, construction costs, labor, tariffs, all that kind of stuff that impacts all facets we just don't have control of. But there's a lot of stuff we do have control of. I think in some of the earlier discussions we had, some of the biggest topics were communication. And how do we communicate internally? How do we communicate externally? And I think that it's a big part of the challenge is just getting people to be on the same page, understanding the same language. I think acronyms that you have, and I have, they don't align all the time. So to that point, construction, communication. What do you think? I'll start with you, Kelly, because I know we had a good conversation about that.
Yeah.
What are you seeing as some of the challenges with communication?
Yeah.
That's an open-ended topic. We can talk about this for an hour.
And I think, it's interesting because regardless of how long you've been doing this, you're going to hear construction costs are rising. And they're rising year over year. They're rising not because of anything you're doing or not doing necessarily. They're just rising. They're going up 1.5% at a rate right now at 1.5% a quarter. And prior to that, I think the last time they weren't rising was 2008. And after that, they've been just rising. You slowly, 2017 to 2018 was probably the biggest jump. And then we're still on a continual rise. So one of the things you can control are the things that you know about, right? And so if you know about what's coming, you can then plan for it so that you're not surprised when the cost goes up. You're actually aware of it. Where we lose control of that is when we're not communicating. So we saw all these great presentations about store design, Nike doing this really cool design. You see people reinventing the retail experience. And that usually starts with the engagement of the design team, right? The design team's got these great ideas and it's going to be really, really cool.
We can spend your money.
What's the price tag, right? So how soon can you integrate that team early on to start, hey, we're designing this. Let's bring in our construction team. Let's make sure we're designing this with costs in mind. And even with real estate, right? So it really begins at the real estate side of things. We're saying, we found this location. Do we think this is going to work? Very early on, bring in the construction team, bring in the design team. It's something as simple as an early meeting just to have that conversation because we're not going to stop these costs from going up. We just have to learn how to deal with them.
Yeah. So it's almost starting at the top more so than too late with the construction. By the time it gets into construction, it's too late. Once you're
the construction guy's scratching his head saying,
why
didn't anybody bring me to the
why was
party?
it designed like this, right? So it's getting that communication from the top, maybe higher ups in the company to push those initiatives maybe before your money gets allocated for the that program, and get your team involved up front.
Right.
So, and then Bruce, you and I were talking a little bit just in general communication. Just people don't pick up the phone. It's the email, they text, and I think that's a big part of it too. Is you're missing that. You think you have a sense of urgency because I sent you an email. Did you get it?
Yeah, and that's important because there's a lot of things can be missed in an email. A lot of things can be missaid, in a text. Whereas when you're speaking with somebody, you have the opportunity to refute or to discuss it a little further. But we're all guilty of that. I really don't like picking up the phone anymore, but I do it when I have to. But I prefer face-to-face. We've talked a little bit about this. In my office, I don't pick up the phone to call anybody's extension. I get them walked to their office. If they're not there, I drop a note and say, come see me in my office, because I like to talk to them face-to-face, and they understand better. They can see your body language. They can see feel the inflection in your voice, things like that. And I think it becomes a more powerful tool than when you hide behind an email. We've all hidden behind emails, and we're real brave behind an email. And I don't like that at all. Most times when I get those emails, I pick up the phone and call the person right away, and you'd be surprised how quickly they go, hello, I didn't mean to send it that way. Wait a minute, let's talk about this. So I think that's a big part of it, and I'm touching on what Kelly said about rising costs. We're going to build, we'll probably touch 4,000, 5,000, 6,000 projects this year, different renovations, new stores, a lot of everything. So we buy a lot in bulk, and when you say communication, one of the things that it hit us about 4 or 5 months ago when all the tariff talk had come up, right away our steel company calls and says, it was just a talk. They were just talking about it. And we get a note saying, prices are going up 20% across the board. And I called BS. I said, how do you mean? With the tariffs haven't gone into play yet. You guys are already raising price. You're using that as an excuse. So you have to call them out now and then. And that's a part where being people up here that are building things that were, and in the audience too, when you're building things, you have a lot more leverage than you really think with some of the vendors and even the contractors. Contractors actually will bend over backwards to give you a break on their costs if you can help them supply the materials to them. And we do that a lot. We'll supply materials because we buy them in such bulk, like HVAC and steel and lighting and things like that, and we'll drop ship them or have them warehouse them, and that saves you some money too. But from some of the smaller companies, the big thing you touched on was over design, and I'm constantly on my, ours is a simple box. It's 10,000 square feet for the most part. It's a rectangle. Tim's box is fairly simple. Your box is fairly simple. And if your architects and your in-house people start over-designing that thing, or your operators get involved, okay, or your merchants get involved, and they all of a sudden want all the bells and whistles, they don't realize what that does to the cost. So you have to stay on that, and you have to explain to them that not only does it cost you money, it costs you time. And time in our business is more important. Sales dollars are everything to the three of us up here, and so that's important. So.
Right, and I think from design, my background's architecture, so I'm always obviously, like Kelly said, I like to just do stuff where if you say, I find a lot, I know, I find a lot of clients, they have these images in their head of what they think they want it to be, or I want a new elevation, I want a new facade, a new signage, or whatever, and they're like, this is great, and we're gonna do this, and give me some concepts, and it kind of evolves from there, and you may get construction involved to get some pricing on it, or you may not, but at that point is that if it gets the go ahead, and then it gets designed, and then it gets into construction, and then the costs start coming back, and you're like, we got to VE it out, and then again, communication, clearly, because you're talking about making sure you're integrating design with the cost factor, the contracting, but they might not always be on board at that point. So it's a challenge from a design side, and I'm sure other people can relate to that as well with programs that you're like, well, this is what management or your higher up said, this is what we want to implement, but they may not understand. They were like, we're going to do 800 stores, and this is going to be the way it is. And each store, whoa, no way, we can't do that. That came way over. We can't do that. You got to cut it back.
Well, and I think that that's a great point, because I think that is what happened to the retail experience over time. So the retail experience became all about budgets and less about the experience. It was like, well, we'd love to have that great experience, but we can't afford to do that right now. And now what's happened is there's been a shift. There's been a shift in retail where more and more companies are focused on the store experience, And now it becomes, how can we get creative and do something fun and exciting? And it's less about, my role right now at Party City is to reinvent the retail experience. So we're looking at that. We're looking at changing the way that the store presents itself. And a lot of these great ideas and these other companies that have done that, I was with a startup company, and it was fairly simple to invent a retail experience in a brand new company that doesn't have a lot of locations. Now try to do it in a legacy company that's been around a long time with a strong brand presence. Yeah. And how do you do that? How do you go back to all your stores? How do you make it affordable? And what we're finding out right now is we're bringing these think tank groups together early on. We're sitting there, we're designing and redesigning the store. What's that?
He laughs.
But it's working because now we're able to more quickly get to that design and more quickly get to what is the real cost going to be, and plan accordingly into our capital plan for next year. Because if we don't plan the capital correctly, we're going to miss our targets. And that's where everything falls down on the construction team. Everything, wait a minute, why is this so expensive? And it's, you didn't invite me to the dance. And I didn't get to help you design this thing so that it would be cost effective.
So is it almost a structure thing internally of how you're organized with construction and
Absolutely.
now?
Absolutely. And to you guys' point, it's communication. It's getting everybody, all of the internal stakeholders together early in the process. And we're fortunate that we actually do a pretty good job of that when somebody in merchandising comes up with the next greatest innovation in retail and they decide they want to roll it out. They're pretty good about pulling together a multi-function, cross-functional team to start talking about the specifics, right? And fortunately, when you talk about the experience, a lot of that is technology, and the technology costs have actually come down some through the years. It seems it's the materials and the labor costs for us that we're seeing, just the opposite.
Right. But those are out of our control, obviously. So those
Many times.
Yeah. And so when you're looking at it from a budgetary standpoint, then what gets cut? So your costs went up. You want to roll out the program. You've got these great concepts. The think tank came through. You've got these great ideas. You're going to implement it. So how?
Save money on the think tank.
Well, that's another budget from somebody else, right? It falls under another category.
Well, it all comes down to, again, it's cost. And again, I've got a little different concept because we stamp out buildings, 30, 40, 50 a month. And so we have to try to stay as simple as we can with the design. Most of our stuff is really based on the point of sale and the graphics and things like that, which aren't really expensive. But to Kelly's point, the experience in a Party City is going to be totally different from what it is in a Dollar Tree or Family Dollar, and Tractor Supply. You've got your customer, right? So you're gonna, our customers are pretty broad, from the needs based to the soccer moms, basically, that that want to come in and buy the bags, and for the wine parties and things like that, and they park their Mercedes around the corner and come on in. But a lot of what happens in the construction side of it is once you start talking about that, and you get the think tankers involved, you get the merchants involved, you get the operators involved, it comes down to one thing that the contractors love, and that's called change orders. And that's what can really bust you up when you get out there, and all of a sudden somebody comes in and they walk in, and they go, oh no, I wanted this over there, I wanted this over there. Well, there goes your cost, and so that's the one thing that people don't realize, and your internal folks don't realize, is when at the end of the year, you're blowing your budget by $2 million on change orders, and so that's the kind of stuff you have to control. But it's controllable. It's just not everybody sees it the same way.
Well, I think again it goes back to communication and communicating that down the chain. Particularly, I know with a lot of clients will have if they have stores that have managers or something, the manager will be like, oh, I need you can't do that. That's not going to work over here. Then you're deviating from the prototype. So you're deviating from and they're making these, and so the contractor will say, I'm just going to do that, or the architects on site be like, yeah, we can do that. That's fine. It's quick change. It's a little it's a little sketch, and and
we see that a lot where you've got a contractor on site who's been there through the project. The management team comes in as you're setting the store, merchandising. This manager has a great idea. This needs to move over here. And the contractor wants to be.
They love it.
He wants to be. Well, they want to do a good job for this store manager, right? I don't think it's always the dollar signs start going off. But I think there is that element. But it's, hey, we want to really do the right thing by the client, and they see that store manager as a client. So one of the first conversations we have with a contractor is if a store manager tells you to do something and you take it upon yourself to do it, you need to, while you're there doing the work, you need to be saying, this is a gift. I'm doing this free, right?
Yeah.
This is out of the goodness of my heart.
Pick up the phone and call you or Kelly or myself
And
some of
that's
our
what we
people
tell them.
before you do a thing.
And we tell them, you contact your project manager first before you turn the first screw, or you are completely at risk. And it somewhat helps mitigate that.
Yeah. But, time, it's moving, the store opening,
That's right.
you're flying. You don't always have that opportunity to say, oh, we'll just send it back. And then you get hit with that change order.
And it's the experience of your contractors too.
Right.
If you have contractors that you use constantly or use a lot, they know what they can do. They know where they can, move things around, do things. So it's again, but it comes back to communication.
You're right, they do. But we've, how many presentations have you seen yesterday and today where they talk about the $1,000 phone in your pocket, right? Yeah. Every contractor out there has a smartphone. So, we can't afford to stop things. You're not.
Yeah.
Take a picture, send me a text message, a phone call. Information is it's instantaneous today. So some of that we faced in the past, we don't necessarily face today, and those excuses kind of go away.
Well, honestly, if the contractors are smart, they're going to get the change order signed up front because the value of the service diminishes once it's been delivered.
So from a construction standpoint then, where are you seeing some of the biggest challenges are from, you had mentioned, labor, you had mentioned, materials, et cetera, but.
Yeah, I don't know what's going on out there today, but plumbing costs have just gone crazy. I guess it's just a shortage, right? They're not that many out there today, but that's the one area that I see that's just really taken a steep upward turn.
I think we're going to continue to see that because for the last 15 years or so, there have been less entries into the blue collar trades. And so a lot of folks, it's interesting, you get people who graduated with their bachelor's degree, they're going back to school as apprentices in electrical and plumbing and different things because there's more money in it now, which we're paying for, right?
Yes.
So those labor rates are going up. Skilled trades are getting more and more expensive.
And I think we were in a panel yesterday, and somebody mentioned, I'm sure it was a contractor, was a retailer, that there are certain areas where they have vocational kids, college or high school kids or college kids coming out as part of the work crew to learn how to learn the trades. And some of the trades, and they were required to hire. I think they were required to hire one or have one on the job. And you were in there. I can't remember who it was. But it was interesting because one of the things I've been thinking about a lot lately is skilled labor. I'm a little bit older than most of you in here, but my father was a plumber. My brother, my friend's dad was a contractor, and the other, bricklayer, and we all grew up with, the skilled labor folks. That's what we were raised with. You just don't see it anymore. The kids don't want to work. The kids don't. They're not ambitious enough to go out and take on manual labor, and that's what's going to hurt us, I think, over time. Now robotics maybe will be something different, and I was talking to what was it the other day about a product that's Velcro now. It's a Velcro, it's a roof, it's a Velcro fastener because you don't have to teach them how to put screws in or nuts and bolts anymore. They use Velcro like they did on their little shoes when they were little kids, So, I don't know what the world's coming to, but I don't even need Velcro anymore. I can't reach my feet. That's the problem. Anyway, but some of that's got to come down to. It's going to come down to materials. It's going to come down to. The skilled labor is going to be an issue. It's a big issue. And plumbing is probably one of the least desirable, trades out there. I mean, everybody wants to be an electrician,
Right.
It's a dirty job.
Yeah, it's a very dirty job. Anyway, so I think it's a problem. And I don't know if anybody has anything to add to that, but it's a problem for us on both sides. And it's a subcontractors, which is really the base. The GCs. We bid every project. We bid 100%.
The same subs, they're bidding the jobs.
And they can't help it. Right. They can't help it. And what happens is if you're in a certain area and using the same GCs over and over, the same 4 or 5 that you bid it to, and they go into the same subs, your costs are going to be so close. Right. It's just really the GC.
Yep.
And so at that point, it's not even a bid anymore. It's more of a negotiation.
Yeah.
So.
And the thing about the plumbers, the electricians, is that whereas a block mason or some of those trades, you can take on the road and take from job to job and say, well, we may not be able to pay you, X per on a job, but via volume, right, scale, you're going to make a decent living doing this work, and you can get those guys on board. Plumbers and electricians, because of the local licensing requirements and whatnot, you just really don't have the ability to nationalize those type of trades, and so that's where you're seeing the.
And we heard a little bit yesterday too about natural disasters, right? Anytime a hurricane comes through, you got all the skilled labor, any labor, they run right to that that insurance job, and that takes away from the jobs that we need done, and it's a big part of it. That you go to management and try to explain that, and they go, oh yeah, right, you're just late again. Yeah, okay, we're late. We just don't. People just run off the jobs. I mean, I remember which one went through New Orleans a few years ago. Everybody came from Texas, all the contract. They were coming as far as California to go because they were making tons of money.
So then you're getting higher costs on the jobs that you already had in place because everybody's gone.
They're late and you're getting higher costs.
Right, and so your budgets are still the same, which you've been allocated, because that was
then
allocated,
the 2 years
ago?
And change things.
No, the architects, they don't change anything, Bruce. I don't know what you're talking about.
That is really a broad issue today anyway because of the low unemployment rate. So you have contractors that come onto a job and you give them a hard time about something. They can walk off the job, and I can get a job down the street. There's projects everywhere, so it's kind of a challenge. It's a challenge that you deal with every day. And if there's a new development going up and you're going into it, right? Yeah. You're fighting with that labor force with everybody else, and everybody wants to not be the last one finishing up because you're gonna have trouble getting the trades there. So. And then you pay through the nose when a change order does come and you start to try and negotiate it. Well,
it's too late.
It really is. It's you're kind of stuck. So, back to communication, right? So as much as you can engage all of your operations teams earlier on, get their approval and sign off on your layouts and your designs. Hopefully you're minimizing those change orders because they had a say in the beginning instead of at the end when they come in and say, you're not giving me enough room for an office or, whatever it might be. So.
But I mean, that's a mindset change for the organization, I would think, when you guys are laying out your plan for the next 2 years, right? Your budgets, so your budgets now are allocated for what, 2021 you're already looking at?
Yes.
So we don't know if there's a natural disaster coming up. We don't know about the labor, the tariffs, how it's going to impact everything. So how do you adjust what's the suggestion to prep for that to help? Because that's obviously going to impact those costs.
Yeah, I adjust so deals getting done today are going to open in Q3 or so of next year. I'm adjusting for that time frame up front now. So when we're bringing a deal into our real estate committee, I'm saying, well, this isn't going to open until Q3, and I'm going to see 4 quarters of price increases between now and the time that this is going to open. So I'm putting those percentages on top of that project, saying I'm adjusting it today because I know those costs are going to go up. And if we don't do that, then what happens is we end up blowing up those budgets later on, and it just becomes a stressful situation, and you're running out of capital because you want to get X number of projects done. That's just one thing I do, and and I recommend that to people so that you're not you're not faced with it later on. I don't necessarily share that with my team.
Kelly, it's communication. Come on.
That's my layer of buffer to get me through that time period. But also just us as leaders have to stay in touch with what's going on with our groups. If people are planning different programs and things, we need to know about that up front.
Right.
So we can put it into our budgets. Yeah. Otherwise, the things we want done are going to get slashed so that these other things can fit. Right. These are the balancing acts, that we all have to deal with.
Yep.
So,
you cut here to do here. That's just a reality.
But you guys have been doing that. I mean, everybody does that, right? You've been doing that all along. You're always planning, putting a little more money in up front, so to catch that if there's any unforeseen costs that come up.
Right, but then the design guy like you says, well, they have it.
Don't go back to the design.
They have a stash.
Well, you guys do. You all do. I don't want to hear that. And then next thing you turn around, then you're like, oh, you go a flagship store somewhere. And I'm like, well, what happened?
We don't have any flagships.
No.
Well, sorry.
No, yeah, I'm not.
Sorry,
sure
Bruce.
what it's all about. No.
What do they?
No, that's a foreign concept.
That's right.
Yeah.
No black sheep for any of them.
Tractor Supplies, Dollar Tree, Party City.
That's
we're
right.
not Nike. We're not.
Come on, you can think big.
Yeah,
Right.
no, the budgeting process is always a fun process in our office. It starts in July and goes through November. But it's kind of crazy because what happens. You start with obviously you start with the top line, right? The comps. Okay, what are we projecting for comps? And well, if you blow up comps don't get there. Everything else gets blown away anyway. So we chase the bottom line like everybody. So we set up a budget and basically what Kelly's talking about. We take historicals and how they've matched up, and we'll go project by project and when they're going to open. And do the same thing, and we do that for 700 projects just on the new store stuff. And it's not a finite science, but it gives you a pretty good estimation of $150 million in capex that we're going to spend. So it's a moving target, but like you said, when it gets down to it, you got to rob Peter to pay Paul somewhere. So.
I mean, it all comes. I mean, your top number is filtering its way through, and that never changes.
That's right.
So.
That's right. Yeah.
Sometimes you get lucky and your costs get lower.
Well, I mean, right. I mean, you can look at it and say, okay, is there anything we could?
You call it lucky, but if you come in 1 year under budget, they expect that the next year.
That's right.
So the
So you don't wanna do
key
that,
is
is
to
what
come
you're
in on budget. Okay,
Yeah.
not one store less, not one store more. Come in on budget. Otherwise,
Well, just tell your design team, then we can give you a
what
ad service.
what
So you don't have to
design-
worry about
what
that.
design- what
So,
design team?
yeah, create one. Yeah, come on.
I know what our building looks like. I don't need you to tell.
So what? So construction. So those are some of the big topics on the construction, and I think you're probably seeing the largest costs coming from construction. Those costs there.
Absolutely.
A little more out of your control. Design, you have more control with that from a communication standpoint, from a documentation standpoint, and how you issue not change orders, but how you issue change directives within your prototype set, if you will. So those changes that come out when you implement them out, when the kind of time frame that you're sending those. You can incur a lot of costs, obviously, with those, if you do it twice a year, 3 times a year, however you do it, if they don't get implemented in. Again, it goes back to communication. So we have all these design changes. You're talking about doing a new prototype, that doesn't always filter its way through by the time that concept gets in, and then when it's been issued, and then they're out in the field, and the store's getting ready to, you're like, well, that's not in. You didn't include that because it wasn't issued into the prototype yet. Right. Are you seeing any impact, any challenges on that end from your side, trying to roll out design initiatives and from the cost standpoint? Just don't do them, maybe? I don't know.
Yeah, I think, well, even when if you're working on, we're in the testing phase right now for some things, and we can't stop the train on all the deals that are getting done and the designs that are underway, but we know there's going to reach a point where if the results say, hey, we should move forward with this new change, now it becomes, how do we roll that now into as many of the locations that we are designing and permitting as quickly as we can. I'm a big believer in software programs help you a lot with that, and project management systems really help with that, and being able to track which locations, who do we need to contact, making sure that the architects were able to update those drawings so that we get it in if we can, and if it's too late, it's too late. So but all of that is just heavy on communication. Without certain systems and programs, it's going to be really hard to communicate that information out, really hard to make sure that the designs were changed when they're changed. If you're doing it while you're in for permits, now you're slowing down your permitting time. So, you want to make sure you pull your permit and then file, the change once you've pulled your, just a lot. Yeah. There's just a lot going on. So the more that we can button up our communication, the better we're going to be at making those changes. But,
Right.
If we decide not to, it's going to be a change order, and it's going to be.
And sometimes we're probably our own worst enemies with that stuff, right? You're like, what's in permitting, that's going to be challenges, but we want to get it in. We got to get that. I see a lot of people like, it's got to go in because it's coming. We got to get it. Yeah. So. And
that's an informed decision. If we decide that we want to do that, then we make that decision and we pay that change order, that additional cost.
Yeah. Absolutely.
So.
One of the things we talked about costs. We talk about time and keeping costs down. But one of the bigger issues that I find is if we if we pinch our contractors and our vendors and suppliers too much, the quality goes down. And with quality going down, maintenance goes up. And maintenance is one of those things, it's like, the gift that keeps on giving, right? Every year it gets worse and worse.
Yes, it does.
And it just, if you got a poorly built building, you got a poorly designed building. So I don't mean, but it can be.
True.
It can be. There's certain things that, oh yeah, that looks really nice, but from a maintenance standpoint, it's going to be a nightmare for years to come. So we try to focus a lot on that too, and so that's why we try to do a lot of spot checks, a lot of quality checks on construction, because you mentioned it the other day that these pre-engineered buildings sometimes, if you don't get them spot on with the erection companies, they're leaking and they're leaking
Right away.
right away.
Right away.
And then rodents get in and all that stuff. So they like hay, by the way. Rodents like
yes,
hay.
they do. Trust me. Bagged dog food.
Yeah, dog
hay,
food and
you
hay.
name it, they love it.
So anyway, so there's a fine line, right? There's a fine line. I want the contractors to get done quickly. Want the job done on time, on cost, everything else. But we got to have the quality too. And then with the skilled labor issues, it relates back to quality. So
right.
it's an ongoing conundrum, so to speak. And we have to manage it all the time. And that goes down to our staffs and our people. But the design is a big part of it. And then being fair to your contractors is important. If you're fair to them, they're going to get the people out there that they need. They're going to get the best people out there, the best super. So super is the key. We know that. You get a good superintendent, a working superintendent. That always helps, and that helps with the quality also. But the maintenance issue is something not too many people talk about a lot.
Right.
But it's a big
It's hitting
deal.
every store. So.
Well, and then when we go to do remodels, right?
That's
Steve's
right.
sitting right here, does a lot of remodels for us, a lot of remodel work for us. You go into a store that hasn't been built correctly or it's poorly maintained, it's a nightmare to remodel it. It costs you twice as much, 3 times as much. So, it all starts with that base building, the base construction of that building. So it's very important to get that done right the first time. So.
I see, this is touching back on a little bit of the design piece there from the fee structure. We see that a lot. We're like, you know what, that's too high. It needs to be cut down. You talk about the quality. Drawings are drawings. The information on the drawings is what is, critical for construction. But, if the costs get cut back, so, we just do that, $4,000 to roll out a plan. What are you going to get for $4,000 for a CD set? So you're going to get what you pay for. But it makes sense, I think, up front from some of the retailers or clients' perspective in the beginning, but they're hitting those costs in the end because they're missing, there's nothing there. Then the contractors are taking the liberty of just, figuring it out or whatever. But a lot of people don't. Yeah, leaving pieces out. Well, it wasn't on the drawings. Well, right, it wasn't on the drawings because you didn't want to pay for a full set. And I get it from both sides, obviously. But it is a challenge. But I think it's making sure that everybody knows that on your end of the table, that listen, this is a direction that we chose to go to cut our costs down on the design piece. So we need to make that, everybody's clear. We're going to have something's, something's going to be like you said, pay Peter. What's the saying?
Rob Peter to pay Paul. Yeah.
There you go.
You got to have a good working document.
Yeah.
You really do, because that way you can hold people accountable to that document. And they say it's not in the plans. Yes, it is. There it is, right there. Why did you omit that?
There are places not to cut,
Right.
and your design is not one. Other than taking a look, it never fails. You get the conversation at the beginning of the year. Well, we talked to a consultant, and they said you should be able to take 20% out of the cost of these buildings.
It's a think tank.
Is that a number? I'm hearing 20% everywhere. Just 20%,
Yeah, it's a
20%,
magic
20%.
number. I think every consultant out there, that's just
I
that's their
guarantee you,
pat
I'm going to
answer.
save you 20%.
Right. Yeah, I'm gonna save you this. So then it's okay.
But you got to pay the consultant 30%.
Well, right. That's right. Yeah.
35.
Yeah.
35.
35.
So you're
Because you cut our fees, remember?
That's
so
right.
it has
That's
to go
right.
more.
That's why you cut the fees, right? So, but you sit there and you think, well, short of popsicle sticks and duct tape, I don't know what else to do. This is about. Tractor Supply. I came to Tractor Supply from Dollar General, Family Dollars, AutoZones. About as simple a building as it gets, right? And so you start wondering. So then you have to start looking at what can I take off of this building, right? We put these, well, I will say like things like we put these elaborate towers on the front of the Tractor Supply store. It's a lot of money. It's a
It
$40,000,
looks good, though. It's a good
$50,000.
design element.
Well, it is.
See, that's what happens, the
structural-
erosion of the
That's right.
experience.
That's right. So then it becomes a decision of, do I take that off, save the $40,000, but what does that do into the brand, right? Is that a critical part of the brand when people see that, that's a Tractor Supply, and so you have to make some hard decisions. And I just went through this exercise where I did a value engineered prototype where we took the tower off, and we took this out, and we're doing this, and then you schedule a visit for the executive committee to go through, and they throw up everywhere when they walk out. And yeah, but you got to put that back on. Well, this is what you get for 20% less, right? This is what you get. So it's a dance, and it's a constant dance. The music never stops.
It's the concept versus reality. It sounds good in the conceptual stage, and then reality is it's diminishing the brand or whatever.
But we've looked at things. So you talk about how do you control costs. So we've on certain projects we've started to direct purchase HVAC units and those type things. So our lighting packages and all those things. So we just said, whereas traditionally we negotiate a national account price, but contractor, you're going to buy it, you're going to install it, whatnot. So we started direct purchasing those things just to try to save the markup, right, from the contractor. That type thing. It's getting contractors involved earlier in the process. If we're going into an inline space, right up front, before the project ever goes to committee, architect, contractor, and my project manager visit that space. Yeah. They do all the takeoffs, all the dimensions, detail all the assets that are there. Then they each create their own number, right? Their own budget, and then we marry the two and see where the differences are. But we started kind of getting away from the 3 to 5 bids and saying, let's negotiate these with one contractor, but we get them involved up front. It's a partnership, and let's see if we can drive costs down that way. It definitely helps in controlling change orders once you get under construction.
Well, I think when you're bidding, I see this a lot. They said, well, we're going to send it out to 6 contractors or 7 contractors. It's like, well,
right.
that's ridiculous. But you can see where the challenges are going to lay. So if you're saying, you get your pool that you have, and you're saying, okay, we're going to give you X amount, and we pre-purchased everything, and so you're losing the markup. So the contractor's going to give you a better price because he knows he's not going to have to compete against 4 other people or whatever comes in there.
So one of the factors that come into play with all of this is time, right? So if you go back to your basic project management triangle, time, scope, cost. They have to be in balance, right? So when you start running out of time, then your cost goes up, your scope changes. So, if we allow ourselves enough time, and you're doing that, it sounds like, early on, right? That's giving you a little more runway. If there's a problem, you're not dealing with that problem then in the middle of the project where you're running out of time. So, if I gave any advice to people, give yourself enough time, right? And when you start running out of it, we have to educate everyone around us, all our business partners. Hey, listen, we're running out of time here. If you're going to want to make a change, you need to do it now. If you don't, it's going to impact everything else. But that's a challenge, right, to do at times. At the leadership level, that's what we have to do.
And it's a good point, because we run a cadence on $350 Dollar Trees this year, 200 Family Dollars, 125 relocations. We don't open any stores from Thanksgiving to January 1st, because that's the busiest time of the year for retailers, for us anyway. So we do, about 40% of our business in the fall quarter. So what happens is when you start to come up against it and you're missing a period, you're missing a month, and you start to get closer to that bewitching hour of the week before Thanksgiving, you start to press and you start to push. Otherwise, that store's going to sit from the end of November to the beginning of January, and that's an asset that sits there, non-producing, sales loss, things like that. So to your point, you try to plan ahead. Ideally, you want to open 60% of your stores in the first 2 quarters of the year. it's what we budget, it's what we shoot for, it's what you hammer into your contractors, you hammer into your people, and invariably if something goes wrong, right?
Yep.
Hurricane, whatever. But it is, that's where you start to slip. You start to get a little more lenient when all of a sudden it's like, I need that thing done. Can you send a crew out there over the weekend?
Right.
You know, and so and you start to value, okay, what's the cost of a store sitting for 45 days but not producing any sales versus spending an extra 10, 15, 20 grand to a contractor to get it done quickly.
Right.
And then you run the risk of that contractor not getting it done on time. So I mean, there's always that, but the time is an issue too. It's lost sales dollars. You know, it's lost sales dollars are what kills us all.
Right. And so I'm hearing planning, plan accordingly. I mean, this isn't anything new, obviously.
No.
So
Plan all you want.
It's back to basics.
it's back. Well, so it is. I mean, but you have to think ahead, plan, budgets, all that stuff. I mean, these are, it has
You
it's
control
changed.
the chaos is what
Well,
you
That's right.
That's right.
That's
Control the chaos, and it's what you do when you build more than one store a year.
Yep.
Because you have the luxury of building. People call all the time and they say, "Oh yeah, we're building 20 this year." I did that last week. It's just
Right.
like one of those things where you just and I get it. Everybody has it, and it has to be. It's just as important to build 20 as it is to build 700. It's just because it's a different process, a totally different process. So you have to be willing to juggle a lot of things and keep a lot of balls in the air at the same time. So
So you said you're talking about technology. Somebody said you're trying to utilize technology.
Right.
So I think there's a lot of value into project planning software. Obviously, you talk about planning and technology, how it filters its way all the way through all parties. Is there anything that you use that might be beneficial for? You're laughing. Right. Is it?
Yeah, well, you know what? I came from a company that had a really nice life cycle management system in place. So it was from the time the deal came in, through real estate committee, through opening, all the way over to the facilities maintenance team. And so coming to Tractor Supply, everything's managed off of Excel spreadsheets. And
Opportunity.
well, yeah, right.
Say that.
Yeah. The problem is it's convincing.
that's because Clay teetered it.
That's right.
That's because he came from Family Dollar.
That's
I just
right.
inherited
That was-
whole thing too.
I
I've changed
begged-
it all. It's crazy.
Yes,
You can't operate off Excel spreadsheets.
Yeah,
You
Clay
can't.
was
It just-
Clay was an old school Excel guy.
You can't remember what's in column A by the time you get to column
That's
T.
right. And I
how
did my
anybody does
best.
that.
But those things come at a cost. And when you work under a low cost model, it's hard to convince people to spend money to bring a system on
You have to do
board that way. Trust
You
me,
gotta do it. You go crazy.
I still
And
beg every
actually, our
chance I get.
contractors are on. We work with Accruent, and it's a lifestyle.
That's what we used at-
That's right.
at
So,
Dollar General.
and we have licenses to our vendors,
Yeah.
and vendors get noticed, and it's,
Yep, yep.
you can't
So much easier.
you can't do more than you can do 5 or 10 projects, but you
Yeah.
can't do. You
Yeah.
just have to have this
Yep.
system. Life cycle management has to be there.
Yep,
Yeah.
absolutely.
And I'm not a big IT proponent, but I tell you what, I couldn't live without it. Those
Yeah.
Excel spreadsheets. When we bought the company, I just went nuts. And I still see some of them come through, and I go, "What are you guys doing? You really cannot read them on a screen, and you can't print them out unless you have your architects with their plotters." You print
Right,
out.
that's right, yes.
And then by the time you get, like I said, and they get so much information, it's like, and 80% of it's useless.
Well, then we charge you for the plot.
Yeah, I
too,
know.
so- Yeah, so-
I got paid, and the
Have like a-
ink is the
oh,
most
okay.
important, most expensive
Yeah, it
thing.
is.
So, all right, sorry. Pardon me? Right now, we're using Accruent. It's a SLM. It's what's we call it? It's a lifestyle management tool.
Are you
That's a
using
great system.
Expedite by Accruent?
No,
or-
we're just it's an acronym. It's our own acronym, SLM. We created the
Yep.
model, but we're talking about switching over. We're talking to some different users right now. So their contracts coming up. So anyway,
But you're right, those are
the
expensive.
systems are all they are, but they're all. But
They're not
it's
that bad.
more expensive.
No.
It's more expensive to miss 150 sales days.
Right.
Yeah. So
Well,
the
then-
web-based programs are a lot more affordable, right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
there's Expedite, which is a web-based
Right.
program.
there's plenty of
There's
Yeah.
Sitefolio, which is a web-based.
Tango,
There's
yeah.
there are several, and if the old out of the box, they used to cost a pretty penny to
they're all
implement, but
web-based
now
so,
Yeah.
So it's
Well, you have
very-
some training, so training costs on that, obviously, time to get people acclimated to it, making sure everybody's using it. And again, if people aren't using it, then,
Right.
then what's the value?
I don't know if I can learn
So,
it, anybody can, so.
Yeah, they're pretty intuitive, and
Yeah,
and the time everyone's spending on their separate spreadsheets, and
Yeah.
and the mistakes that are being made. I mean,
And
even
then emailing them around, so,
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's
Yeah,
you
do
can
away
you
with
can
that stuff.
present the case to get it approved.
yeah.
It's just
I
it's
can
just
present an easy
putting that
case.
together. So.
All you do is send one of those spreadsheets to your boss.
Right.
And then send them a lifestyle, management tool, and it'll be done.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
But that's more, I mean, that's a minimal cost from a development standpoint to help you guys. But I think from a standpoint of keeping it planned, keeping it on track and understanding.
and our
it's
helping our
pretty-
vendors, actually. Our vendors have access to it and have visibility to it, and they're notified. As soon as they, we need this here, we need that there,
Yeah.
operators are notified. I mean, there's a list of people that get notified
Yep,
at
that's
every
right.
milestone. It's a
Yeah.
milestone.
It's accountability.
That's right.
Yeah.
It's accountability.
That's right. It's almost, you have to have it.
Yeah.
So.
Well, it goes back to communication, the first point that we were just talking about. So it's communicating digitally, but it's communicating to the entire team at once, not piecemealing things around, getting all of your RFIs or anything that comes through. Everybody has the visibility for it, so
Right.
it's open visibility. So I think that's the biggest. It's like the biggest takeaway that I'm hearing here from you guys. So, anybody have any questions? Any comments on anything? We still have a few minutes left.
Got a microphone.
No heckling.
We can
No
hear her.
heckling, no. Okay.
We can hear her.
This really isn't a question, but I wanted to make an announcement for the industry. I'm part of the Retail Contractors Association Committee, and what we, all the general contractors in the industry were struggling with trades. So what we decided to do is implement a program for recruiting underprivileged teenage children through high school and also military. And we're helping to assist them with educating them, tradesmen, giving scholarships, and giving them all the general contractors. Peter Ferry's in his areas working with underprivileged children. Others in the southeast and northeast are working with ex-military to give them a place of employment. And that is what we decided to do to tackle rising development costs, because we're looking for better tradesmen. And so I just wanted to make that announcement for any general contractors out here, and also any of the retailers to help us with that
Yeah, I
program.
That's great.
And if you just
Thank
give us more information on that, we'll be happy to
Yeah.
help. Because we all,
Support the RCA general contractors that are implementing this for the industry.
okay,
Great.
okay, well, for it.
Maybe somebody else.
Yeah.
It's hard to see with all these lights.
know.
Like,
Getting a sense.
Hi,
Hi.
Linnell Grimes with Fitch. So we're a rollout architect, and one of the things that I really like that you guys talked about is schedule and kind of slowing down to speed up. Jim Arca, who may not still be here, but he's from T-Mobile. Oh, he's one of my
Yeah.
favorite people. Because he actually implemented a program that was based on predictability and lock dates, and a system where every single project wasn't an emergency, and expedited drawings and expediting reviews and change orders and contractors and retail technology not showing up. And I think that rollout really has the benefit of having really smart people who can implement these programs. But the other part of our business is store of the future concepts, where we're working with new brands, sometimes digitally native, and they don't know a lot about development. And a few things that consistently get missed are upfront KPIs around digital development, KPIs around what a pilot store concept costs versus rollout, and then also expediting costs. So if we know that it would normally take 8 months to build a store, but we want to do it in 4 months, what's our overtime and union labor and things like that? I'm wondering how you guys are able to implement strategic rollout methodologies into new store concepts in an effective way to balance some of those expectations around those three factors.
That's a good question. And Kelly, we were just kind of talking about this a little,
Yeah.
a little while ago.
Yeah, so I've only been with Party City for a few months. Prior to that, I was with a startup company that rolled out lots and lots of stores and didn't have any systems or processes in place. Store design was a moving target continually. Opening 20 stores for this company, I'll take opening 100 stores with with another company over that, because it's very complicated. Every decision involved the committee, the brand team. I'm sure if you're doing this with startups, you're experiencing some of that. So again, it came down to communication, developing the milestones and how long things should take, and holding people to those timelines. So we would run into wanting to do some really cool design element at Rockefeller Center in the middle of November to open the store. And our budget was tiny, and it was very, very quickly saying, hey, this is how long this will take. This is what it's going to do to the budget. Are you okay with opening 2 months late? No. Okay, so let's go back. But just having that communication very early on. And I would say, you as an architect dealing with some of these startup companies, it's really just outlining that schedule to these folks, because they just don't know and they haven't done it before. But taking some of the traditional things you're hearing from all of us, building out that standardized schedule with your dependencies, right? If you need to have your design in by this date, if you want your permit by that date, and if you want to change your design, this is your deadline, your go no go date. Holding to all of those timelines, all of the things I think you intuitively already know, but just bringing that into some system or process. And for the startup companies, I think they should immediately get some software to help them, to guide them through what it is they're doing. And that's what I did with my previous company. Is we put software systems in place, and they're operating with that today, and they're not missing their deadlines, which is great. It sets them up for the future.
Okay, good question. So
You got one last question, and this is for the panel or anybody else in the room. So I came from a regional restaurant chain, and the costs were fairly average, and joined a company that were ramping up our development coast to coast. And I have 8 projects that go from 1.6 million to 2.6 million. And I wouldn't say the site work is overly complicated on the 2.6. So the question is there any sources out there? Bruce, you kind of touched on it. But you can look at your own portfolio and say, well, we did 40 stores in Missouri, so I know what the costs are. Is there any sources out there that I can say, cost in these regions are going to be, significantly higher or lower than, national averages? So we're not caught with, $1 million delta on a project.
Yeah, the RS means cost data, the
Yeah.
RS means cost index. It'll give you a multiplier for every region you're going into for labor and materials.
I think one of the things that you're getting more stuck on site work, aren't you? Is that where you're going with? Yeah. Right. Yeah. So the materials cost indicators are good, but site work is a moving target in every state. And you go to Tennessee, you're going to hit rock. You go to Texas, you got unstable soils. You go to, and that's the only thing I can help you with on that is from our experience. You can ask an engineer, they'll tell you, oh no, the soils are fine, and then as soon as they start digging and they find a cavern underneath something in Tennessee, or those underground Kentucky or whatever, and so you just have to know the states from this. Where we get burned more on our freestanding buildings is in the site work. It's not so much the material cost, and again, it could be because our buildings are fairly simple and we don't have a lot of variations on the materials. But site work is the biggest culprit. And I think any contractor will tell you that's the easiest place to hide costs, because you can't really track. It's really hard to track extraordinary site issues. Materials you can track, but all of a sudden we ran into bad soils. Well, you should have known that ahead of time, because we have all the soils reports and things. So I think that the one thing that where you're going to see that your costs get out of control is in the site work from my experience anyway.
But to your point, though, with all things equal, when you look at two projects, we've always been able to rely on historical data, right? We collect it. We know Northeast it's going to cost this, Southwest this, whatever. So collecting that data is important. The other thing is, though, you're in a room here, right? Network.
Yeah,
Reaching out to peers is just, you can't put a value on that because we've been there, we've seen it. So network, and that's how you're gonna.
We all have somebody in the board of directors or whatever to report to, so if we can help you out, we're happy to do that, because everybody's got to report up to somebody, so.
But I do recommend you go to RS Means.
RS Means.
Yeah.
Turner. You know,
Means,
right,
yeah.
and they publish annually on every trade, or you could just do the overall. So, I tend to create an estimating sheet, and a place where I can plug it in, that multiplier. So, and it's pretty accurate. So, and if you haven't hit all your labor, it'll be very accurate. If you're building here in San Diego, it's going to give you probably a 1.4 multiplier. So, I mean, it really does adjust. It adjusts in different parts of the country.
Yeah, so like kind of backing up, so we're doing 3 stores in Iowa, and the CMU, the going vertical, was actually, it was a $300,000 delta between some projects in the Southwest. And so I don't know, next year I might be doing something in Maryland, I'll do something in Atlanta, I'll be doing something in Spokane, Washington, and just so RS Means, it sounds like the source to go to.
Yeah,
Unless you're in
it'll be
Hawaii,
helpful.
then just
I
forget it.
think too, from a design perspective, if you're doing, a program across, multiple regions, to have flexibility with construction types of your prototype. So you could do wood frame. If you're going into an area, for Florida, you do CMU. You kind of will have that flexibility built into your prototype to help offset some of those costs. Oh, it was car. I couldn't. I'm sorry, I can't see. Sorry. Okay. Yeah. But in general, just overall for people like that. So anyway.
Yeah.
I think any other questions? I think we're
Trying to cut us off.
You see me creeping in.
He's moving up. So.
Well, this was an excellent discussion. Thank you, Shawn, for moderating, and obviously thank the panelists as well. One thing I just want to mention, we will do some write-ups of these discussions, post them on the blog. We'll obviously share them with you guys first, make sure there's nothing said that you don't want out in public. And also, a lot of the talks we also have been recording, so there'll be videos. We'll be dropping them out over the next few weeks and months. So thank you guys for an excellent discussion here. And I know not everyone's still here anymore, but I want to thank everybody for joining us this year. You guys hit on it, networking, coming together, collaborating, and hope to see you guys next year as well.